She looked me dead in the eyes, slipped off her wedding ring, and said, "He listens better than you ever did." Then she walked out on our anniversary wearing the necklace I gave her the night our daughter was born. No apology. No hesitation. Just the quiet click of the door behind her and the sound of my world collapsing. That's how I learned my wife of 16 years had traded me for a man who didn't know how many spoons we kept in the drawer, but somehow he was enough for her to destroy everything we built. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama resilience and unexpected twists. Now settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Ethan Hayes stepped inside his Upper West Side townhouse, the echoes of the city's late-night hum muffled beneath the weight of 16 years he carried in his chest. Everything looked the same, the girls' backpacks by the stairs, the half-open sketchbook with a nearly finished horse, and yet nothing would ever be the same again. The dinner table was set for 3, but only one chair now held meaning. He had been on the phone all afternoon, coordinating a catering hiccup at a downtown site, and had finally thought he could come home early enough to surprise Geneva. Instead, he found a single voicemail waiting. He couldn't remember the last time his phone buzzed after 10, but today it had. He checked the caller ID, an unlisted number. He should have ignored it, should have known better. Instead, he pressed play. "She's with me now," said the deep, clipped voice of Silas Dubrian, confident, cold. "Don't bother calling her. If you need to talk, speak to my lawyer." Silence pressed in around Ethan as he closed his eyes, letting the words settle like ice in his lungs. He pressed play again, then again. The voice stayed the same, smooth, emotionless. Not a hint of remorse. No apology. Just victory. He set down the phone and took a slow breath, timing each heartbeat as if it were a bomb's ticking fuse. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't pick up his keys, storm out of the house, or wake the girls. He simply walked to the bar, withdrew a glass, and measured out one finger of rye, the one Geneva had once declared stunning in this lighting. Now it tasted like sorrow. He stepped onto the balcony and stood with his bare feet anchored to the cool wood floor. The city lights blurred beyond the rail, but they offered no solace tonight, only reminders of everything he'd built, every memory, every laugh that had once filled these walls. The ice clinked in his glass. His breath misted in the late spring chill, and he watched the whiskey melt in near silence. He thought of their wedding day, how she'd stood under golden lights, her hair catching the breeze the moment his daughters were born, their tiny fingers wrapping around his own. He remembered birthdays spent waiting for her to come home, the nights he stayed up planning college funds, the promises they made together. None of that mattered anymore. The voice played again in his mind. "Speak to my lawyer," as if he was a negotiable asset to be transferred with care, as if he was someone else's problem. He took one final sip, closed his eyes, and let the silence roll through him, not like a burden, but like armor. Because tonight, he realized he had to become someone else entirely. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama resilience and unexpected twists. Now settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Ethan Hayes woke before dawn, the city still hush-soft around his townhouse, but the edges of his mind were jagged with last night's revelation. He moved through the kitchen in silence. His daughter's breakfast untouched, the cereal standing still in its bowl. He couldn't swallow the thought that his family life had already become transactional, someone else's property to negotiate. He washed a mug, filled it with black coffee, and stared into the dark brew as if searching for a clue. By mid-morning, he found himself at Winter & Levanter LLP, its polished marble facade reflecting the gray sky. Silas Dubrian had said to speak to my lawyer, so he would. He entered the lobby with a steady gait. A receptionist glanced up, recognized him before he even spoke. She said his name aloud, as though testing whether this was real. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Levanter is expecting you." Her voice was all civility. In public spaces, appearances mattered more than truth. A young associate, sharp suit, nervous eyes, led Ethan down a corridor lined with frosted glass and hushed ambition. Ethan's own heartbeat remained quiet. He knew what he was doing, stepping into the belly of the beast. When the associate ushered him into the conference room, Ethan took a moment to absorb every detail: steel gray walls, an untouched pitcher of water, the low hum of the city beyond the tinted glass. Moments later, Preston Levanter strode in. Exact hairline, precise folding of cufflinks, an air of legacy wealth. His handshake was crisp, but polite. His smile practiced. A man used to controlling narratives. But when Ethan Hayes looked into his eyes and introduced himself with calm authority, "Yes, I'm the husband." Preston froze. Just a flicker, but enough. The aura shifted. The setting changed. Their eyes locked. No lawyer's tricks, no openers. Preston offered a seat, but Ethan stayed standing. Preston spoke first, his voice smooth, "Mr. Hayes, I believe you received my client's message. I was unaware you'd respond so promptly." Ethan's tone matched the room, quiet, precise. "Your client said, 'She's with me now.' You also said I need to talk to you, not my wife. That was clear enough. So I'm here." Preston smiled, then stilled. He sat. Ethan remained upright, hands relaxed at his sides. The waiter walked in unnoticed. Preston's water glass trembled the way someone's calm does when they realize they misjudged their adversary. Levanter cleared his throat. "This doesn't have to be adversarial. Geneva and we want to resolve this discreetly." Ethan lifted his gaze, unwavering. "Honestly, if it were my decision, there'd be no resolution. Not now, not ever. But since we're here, I need clarity. Why now? Why this veneer of civility?" Preston's jaw tightened. "I'm just the messenger." Ethan let that sit. Then he glanced down at the untouched folder on the table, a legal offering, a trap door, something unnamed, but waiting. "Then deliver a message to Silas for me," Ethan said quietly. "Tell him this: if he ever calls again, he'll speak to me first, not through lawyers. Because whatever game he thinks he's playing, there's someone in the dark room that says otherwise." Levanter froze again, fingers hovering over the folder. He did not expect the folder to remain unopened. He barely expected Ethan Hayes to speak calmly, let alone to highlight that power didn't always roar. The room held its breath, and Ethan Hayes stood quietly in the eye of the storm. Ethan Hayes returned home that afternoon with the same quiet confidence he'd used at the law firm, but inside his insides had shifted. The house greeted him with a silence he barely recognized. No laughter, no chatter from the girls, no mention of Geneva. He paused at the bottom of the stairs, noticing again that familiar sketchbook. It was open to a nearly complete horse, an unspoken memory of last week's art class. He swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat and continued toward his study. Inside, he found a note on his desk. Geneva's handwriting measured and calm. I think we've been drifting for 2 years, Ethan. I'm sorry it didn't work out. 2 years. The word echoed in his mind like a challenge. 2 years of drifting implied gradual wear, not the explosive betrayal he felt 6 months ago. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. Security logs from their home system loaded in seconds. The list showed a private guest code being used first appeared 6 months ago, always on Friday afternoons. He clicked through the entries, each visit logged precisely, regularly, consistently. He pulled up Geneva's bank statements next. Charges at upscale hotels, a spa downtown dinner reservations, at a gallery restaurant he'd never heard of. He saved screenshots and printed statements, stacking them in a folder. Then he remembered something: their anniversary tickets. They were never used. He'd tucked them in a drawer and promised to reschedule. Tonight he searched for them online, saw who curated the exhibit. Silas Dubrian's name appeared in the reviews. The tickets weren't a gift for them. They were a gift for her. Ethan closed the laptop. The room, his sanctuary, now held evidence of betrayal. He stared at the folder and took in a single thought. The drift wasn't 2 years, it began 6 months ago. He picked up his phone and called his assistant, Maria. Sheila proposed a freelance art show, yes. We'll need to confirm her schedule and track delivery timelines. But first, add these items to my archive. He described the folder's contents. March through present frequent visits, gallery charges, unused tickets. Understood, Maria replied. Everything will be organized. Later that evening, he passed the girls' room. Their bunk beds stood empty, the nightlight casting soft shadows. He paused just outside the door, closing his own eyes for a beat. No anger rose tonight, just a cold resolve. He'd let the betrayal speak for itself. He returned to the balcony with a fresh glass of whiskey. Ice cracked in the glass like shattered trust. The city stretched below him, streetlights, passing cars, distant sirens. And it was all familiar and still unreachable. He thought of his daughters sleeping upstairs, unaware of the depth of their mother's deception. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing in the night air. He remembered their first family trip, how they'd all collapsed on the sand after dinner, full and salty, oblivious to what would come next. That memory was his unspoken anchor now. He set the glass on the railing and took one last look at the sketchbook silhouette against the window light. He turned away and walked inside, letting the darkness close behind him. The folder remained open on the desk. The drift might have begun quietly, but tonight he charted its course, and tomorrow he would start pulling at its threads. The Blue Sparrow felt different tonight, bright polished, too alive. Ethan Hayes walked in with Lena and Mira, their elbows touching, as if seeking solidarity. The clatter of dishes and laughter in the warm downtown haunt might have felt familiar once, but tonight the echoes pressed down on him. He chose a corner booth, walls lined with vintage framed photos, the dim light casting soft shadows across white tablecloths. A server guided them to the seats. Ethan glanced at his daughters. They were quiet, a far cry from the giggles they'd shared earlier at home. As he sat, Lena looked up with large brown eyes and asked Daddy, "Where's Mommy?" Ethan didn't lie. He had learned truth was better than empty excuses. He put down his menu and replied gently, "Mommy needed some space tonight." Mira 7 frowned and stirred her water thoughtfully. "She needed space last week too," she said quietly, voice barely more than a whisper. "She was with that man. I saw her." Ethan's heart tightened. He let his daughter speak. She was touching his shoulder. Mira continued tracing a pattern on the tablecloth with her finger. "At the Gallery Theater. You weren't there." The words hit him not like betrayal, but like broken glass, sharp, sudden, unforgettable. Ethan looked at Mira's small hand, and then at his other daughter. "Thank you for telling me, sweetheart," he said, voice soft but firm. His eyes didn't leave hers. He didn't question further. He simply absorbed the moment, his silence shielding them, letting the weight fall where it belonged. He also noticed the waitress who'd seated them. She paused nearby, watching. The way she looked at Ethan, concerned, thoughtful, told him something crucial. The world was witnessing this fracture too, and whispers would follow. He swallowed the lump in his throat, nodded to the waitress, and asked for bread. He didn't ask about Geneva. He didn't need to. The meal arrived, steaming plates of pasta and fresh-baked bread, their aroma oddly comforting. He paid little attention to the flavors this evening. It wasn't about food anymore. It was about holding together the pieces of a family unraveling. He finished the dinner, quietly helped Mira zip her jacket, and buttoned Linda's coat. There were no more questions from the girls. There was nothing more to ask. He handed the waitress a generous tip and left. Outside the city, hum felt less distant, more alive, almost mocking in its indifference. Ethan walked his girls home under streetlights, silent, steady. Mira's coat was zipped high. Lena stuck close under his arm, and he didn't need to hold their hands to keep them from drifting. Lena spoke up as they reached the townhouse. "Daddy, do you think our family can still be a family?" Ethan knelt and looked into both their eyes, a moment of fragile importance. "We're bending," he said, "but we're not breaking. Some things crack, but the pieces still fit." They parted with hugs in the hallway. He tucked them into bed, lingering in the doorway, looking at their peaceful, sleeping faces, the quiet proof he was still their anchor. He stepped back into the night, closing the door softly. In the living room, he sank into the couch and closed his eyes. The betrayal was no longer private. It was out in the open, confirmed by his daughter's words, witnessed by a waitress written across the city's quiet streets. But the fracture wouldn't define them, he would. He would define them all by what comes next. Ethan Hayes lost count of how many late-night calls his attorney, Rob Kinley, had made since the restaurant scene. But tonight's call was different. Amid legal moves and custody forms, Rob's voice crackled with hesitation. "She says she's considering requesting full custody," Rob said softly. "She's citing emotional strain, suggesting you haven't been present enough. No threats yet, just positioning." Ethan listened without interruption. He glanced at the girls' school photos taped above his desk, two smiling faces that held a lifetime of trust. He placed his palm lightly over Mira's face, in one of the pictures, not a threat, a promise. "Arrange a preliminary meeting with Geneva's therapist," he said quietly. "And get me documentation on every missed event, games, recitals, medical visits, anything that paints absence in my direction." Rob hesitated. "She didn't miss school events, she's been active. You missed 2 parent-teacher nights last month during the South Bronx site crisis." Ethan didn't blink. Disaster prep took priority. "I'll absorb that, but let's examine her patterns too. She skipped both the fundraiser and our daughter's math night last month. She prioritized social appearances over school." Rob noted it. Understood. Ethan stood and walked to the window. Above the skyline, lights glowed across the city, but none as bright as the flames he'd been quietly stoking. Finalize that custody petition for sole custody, he instructed. Asset protection, too. She's welcome to her emotional rebirth, but not with our daughters as collateral. He ended the call and sat heavily in his chair, mind already mapping the next move. The next morning, the girls headed off to school. Ethan pressed coffee, then collected canvases their art class needed. Maria stood in the doorway. They think your therapist's data wasn't compelling, she reported. So she contacted her own counselor. You're being painted as distant. Ethan nodded. Good. Then let her narrative show its cracks when confronted with facts. Proceed with our strategy. Maria hesitated before speaking. Your daughters, if they were concerned, they didn't show it. Mira told her tutor, Daddy's here. He always checks homework. A small smile touched his lips. He placed the canvases into his car and closed the door on his reflection. Later that afternoon, he met with Dr. Olivia Carroll, Geneva's therapist, in her softly lit midtown office. Warm earth tones and bookshelves filled the room. Dr. Carroll's voice was gentle but firm. Mrs. Hayes is experiencing a significant shift in identity, stability, confidence. She uses language like freedom and rebirth, but she didn't mention the children. Ethan nodded but didn't speak. He listened as she detailed emotional exhaustion, depression hinted in journal entries, even one ominous line, I don't know who I am anymore. Dr. Carroll met his gaze. Her sense of self is fractured. The custody claim, while legal, may be emotionally motivated. It's not vindictive, it's desperate. Ethan closed his eyes. He recognized desperation. He also recognized leverage. Thank you, he said. That's all I needed. That evening, he walked his daughters home from art class. They chattered about colors and brushes. Mira showed him her painting, two figures under a bright sun. Mommy and me, she said. Lena added Daddy's with us, too. He smiled and ruffled her hair. Exactly. As they reached their doorstep, he paused, looking at their faces. I'll always be here, he whispered. They smiled and stepped inside. Alone in his study later, he placed the custody petition on the desk above the folder of evidence he'd collected since the gallery tickets. The air was still. No fireworks, no rage, just purpose. He poured a single stream of rye into a glass. The liquid caught the lamplight as if glowing with intent. He walked to the balcony with the glass and turned to face the city. Tonight his daughters slept, thinking they belonged fully to him, and he'd make sure they always would. This chapter marks the first move in the legal arena, a quiet but firm strike to protect what matters most. Ethan clipped his tie and exhaled as he walked into Winter and Levanter LLP again, not as a visitor, but as someone with purpose. Today's meeting differed from the first. His folder felt heavier in his bag. He passed through the same polished entrance, nodded at the receptionist, and was escorted into Preston Levanter's conference room. The sterile gray walls and unread water glass felt familiar, like a stage finally set for the unmasking. Levanter entered with a smile that no longer held warmth. His posture was open, but his eyes were guarded. Mr. Hayes, he began, voice clipped. I understand you've had time to consider our initial discussions. Ethan pulled out the folder and set it flat on the table, aligning it with a slow precision. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with his steel resolve. Yes, I have. He opened the folder. Inside documents, invoices, signed statements, a mortgage agreement that meticulously clarified property ownership, a sequence of bank transfers, each sheet a brick in the wall he was building. Levanter spread his hands, leaning back. In good faith, I want to remind you this still doesn't need to be adversarial. Geneva. Ethan held up a hand. Let me ask you something, Mr. Levanter. Did you tell your client the Brooklyn condo is 100% mine, that she never had co-ownership, that the bank reaffirmed this last month? Levanter's professional mask faltered into confusion. His eyes darted to the papers. I was not aware. We were under the impression it was a marital asset assumptions, Ethan replied. Dangerous in legal matters. He closed the folder and stood towering over the table. You said discreet. You offered that as though I'd pay for it. Let me be perfectly clear, privacy has no price tag for me, unless it includes full custody of our daughters. Levanter swallowed hard. He glanced at the paperwork again. Perhaps. We can amend proposals, Ethan pressed. Amanda, I don't negotiate my children's well-being. I don't bargain with broken trust. I make decisions. You tell your client this Geneva gets the condo for her freedom, but not the proceeds. She can keep belongings she paid for, there's a receipt book. But custody, she keeps nothing unless she helps them keep their mother. Preston hesitated. Sweat beaded at his temple. That's rigid. Ethan's voice was quiet but unwavering. It's protective. It's fair. It's factual. Silence filled the room again, the only sound the hum of traffic outside. Levanter swallowed. I'll relay this. But you must also consider compromise. Ethan leaned in. This is not compromise. It's clarity. He closed his folder, picked it up, and slid it across the table. Levanter's fingers brushed it as if handling evidence of a crime. Thank you for seeing me, Ethan said. He turned calmly and walked out, leaving a stunned Sweet behind. Later that evening, back at home, Ethan helped his daughters with dinner. Lena practiced a speech. Myra arranged veggies in rows across her plate. He listened, asked questions, supported without pity. The girls laughed over milk carton jokes, unaware of the legal maneuvering underway, just of their best interest. After tucking them in, Ethan retreated to his study. He opened another folder, details from Preston's internal email chain, notes on property rights, statements of intent. Everything ready for his lawyer to file. Then he poured himself a glass of rye. As the light hit the amber liquid, he allowed himself a small, quiet sigh. He raised the glass to his lips and closed his eyes. He wasn't fighting with rage. He was acting with resolve. Tonight, the legal board had been set, and he held all the pieces. Ethan Hayes woke to sunlight slipping through the blinds on a Saturday morning, an uncommon luxury these days. The townhouse felt different, emptier, like a room you remember forgetting. He dressed in muted tones and packed a small bag. No fanfare, no words, just quiet determination. When Lena and Mira bounded into the kitchen, still half asleep, he offered warm oatmeal and fresh fruit without explanation. They smiled, their energy filling the space. He didn't comment on their mother's absence, they already knew. By mid-morning, his assistant Maria arrived with 2 coffee cups and a box of art supplies. Ethan slid canvases into his SUV and helped the girls into their car seats. Maria watched from the doorway, eyebrows raised but supportive. Your new place is ready, she said. Ethan nodded, and they kissed their goodbyes before pulling away. The townhouse was no longer home. It was an echo. He didn't lock the door. Instead, he left it slightly ajar, a signal that nothing about this transition would have drama. They arrived at the row house in Harlem, a palette of warm tones, natural light, and quiet dignity. He'd renovated it himself years ago, saving it for a fresh start. Today, it would become their new foundation. While the girls claimed their rooms unpacked art supplies and discovered built-in bookshelves, Ethan set the thermostat and made sure everything worked from blackout curtains to the Wi-Fi. No grandeur, just function. Afterward, they gathered in the living room for pizza and board games, their laughter echoing like wind chimes in a still garden. At bedtime, Mira pressed her small hand against his cheek. "I like it here, Daddy." He kissed her forehead and whispered, "So do I." Once they were asleep, Ethan poured himself a glass of rye and stepped out onto the small balcony overlooking the quiet street below. The house hummed with possibility. He thought about the quiet goodbye he'd given his daughters, not an end, but a pivot. No yelling, no sobbing. Just fidelity to their shared past, and a future still worth shaping. He closed his eyes, remembering that first family photo, Lena's crooked smile, Mira clutching a teddy bear, Geneva, hovering behind them in perfect warmth. That image still held truth. He'd preserved it just as he'd preserved everything they were now building. When he returned inside, he found Maria waiting by the door, her expression respectful and steady. "Everything's set," she said. "Tutoring arrangements, school emails, schedule synced." He nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated before speaking. They asked about their mom. Without looking away, he replied, "Let them know she decided some changes needed space, not blame." Maria paused, then closed the door quietly. Ethan walked past it, back to the living room. He stared at the sleeping girls through a softly lit window and whispered, "We're bending, but we're not breaking." He left the glass untouched on the coffee table, then turned off the light. The house was quiet. So was he. But in that quiet, he heard the sound of possibility, of loyalty, renewed trust, preserved life, re-anchored. Tonight, their foundation was being rebuilt quietly and firmly, one measured step at a time. Geneva Hayes jiggled her phone in her hand, debating whether she should call no text Ethan. She was in the living room of Silas Dubrian's penthouse, its floor-to-ceiling windows bowing to the city skyline beyond. It should have felt like home by now, elegant and exclusive. Instead, it felt like a gilded cage. She'd inherited Silas's warmth and confidence, but tonight she inherited something colder, uncertainty. She paced in front of the fireplace, boots clicking against polished marble. Silas paced too, his reflection warping in glass frames. He cradled a tumbler of scotch, jaw clenched. "He's filing." Her voice wavered like a tremor. "I got served this morning." She dragged out the court documents, photos, fees, custody requests. Sole custody, asset freeze. He's practically erased me from their lives. Silas stirred the ice slowly. "I know," he said at last. "I've seen what he's doing with the condo." He waved the scotch. "Federal attorneys, custodian filings. You're collateral damage in his campaign." She sank onto the edge of the couch, shocked. Collateral. This was supposed to be different. We were building something new together. Silas shook his head. He anticipated all this. He planned for it. He's not scrambling like you. He built quietly collected evidence, made precise moves. While you were rewriting life scripts. Geneva stared at him raw. "So he's winning." Silas nodded slowly. "More than that. He's weathering the storm." "Geneva, you're drowning." Tears welled. Everything had spiraled too fast, the gallery, the vacations, the whispers of rebirth. She had wanted relief from emptiness, not to step into a legal war. But now her half-truths were being quantified, documented, dismantled. She glared down at the documents in her lap. "I thought this path would prove my strength. Instead, it's exposing how fragile we both are. Silas poured her a scotch, but she pushed it away. Liquor won't fix this, she said. She covered her face, letting exhaustion wash over her. I never wanted to hurt him or the girls. I just wanted to feel alive. He watched silently. Then he leaned forward, voice low. Survive, but not here. He flicked at the glass. Tonight, leave. Go somewhere they can't find you. Regroup. She shook her head almost violently. I can't run again. I'm tired of that. This was her choice, her rebellion. Now it was breaking her. Silas sighed, stepping closer. I'll set it up. You don't have to talk to any lawyers yet. Just disappear. Geneva closed her eyes. Abscond. Abandon. Escape. She mouthed the words. It felt like betrayal, but maybe less betrayal than losing her daughters. She looked at Silas, voice steady. Get the car ready. Back at his townhouse, Ethan reviewed school emails. Maria had forwarded a note from Mira's teacher about resilience and growth. He wrote a simple reply. Thank you. We're focusing on stability at home. He hit send, then stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street. The girls were asleep upstairs, safe behind walls he'd rebuilt. Down the block, lights in Silas's penthouse remained on no sign of escape, no sign of Geneva. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just exhaled. Because he knew things were shifting. The chaos might come crashing faster now, but tonight was still theirs, anchored in calm. Geneva's decision echoed a disappearing car, sent her into overnight uncertainty. But tonight was about a different front. Ethan Hayes walked through the school's double doors, his steps measured yet confident. He'd been here countless times for parent-teacher nights, bake sales, art shows. Tonight he wouldn't let gossip pull him under. In the brightly lit hallway, faces familiar from drop-off nodded in polite recognition. One mother paused just long enough for a glance. Her glance flicked to Ethan, then to her child, a boy who followed behind with a smirk. Hayes, Daddy still teaches algebra. The boy rolled his eyes, but the glance had been enough. Ethan faced the boy and knelt. He met the glint of mockery head-on. I teach honesty, he said with a calm tilt of his chin. He stood, gestured forward. The boy followed silent. Whatever gossip had run wild this moment planted a counter-narrative. He walked into the principal's office, closed the door. The air smelled of cleaner, and crayons gone stale. Mr. Hayes, Principal Burnett, said, voice low. I'm glad you're here. Inside, a small group of parents had gathered Geneva's friends and acquaintances, faces he recognized from charity galas and school fundraisers. Their expressions bore the polite mask of concern, laced with surprise, an adult whisper that had reached adolescent ears. One of our sixth graders repeated rumors about family issues, Burnett began. Your daughter Lena was upset today. The mother who reported it said it was untrue gossip about custody and separation. Ethan nodded. I see. Burnett offered a folder. Inside notes from counselors, a statement from Lena, documentation of the boy's comments. We wanted you involved before anything escalated. Ethan opened the folder, scanned the pages. Line by line, he absorbed hope and fear. Lily's note said, he's gone. She's with someone else. He closed it. Thank you for being proactive. His voice was steady. He explained his support, one-on-one conversations, a small group talk box in class, permission to reach out to anyone spreading rumors. Principal Burnett nodded solemnly. They responded well. Ethan paused at the door on the way out. He looked at her, his daughter older, now brave. She caught his gaze and gave a small smile. He smiled in return. They walked home after dusk. Street lamps pooling light at their feet. The sharp edge of gossip had come close, but they'd met it gently, firmly. In the darkness, he told them quietly, "Some stories are loud, but we don't have to shout back. We show up. We tell truth." Mira squeezed his hand. "I like telling truth with you, Daddy." He ruffled her hair and nodded. "Me too. That's why this matters." Later at home, he tucked them into bed. He looked at their small ankles, uncovered, unafraid, trusting. Then he returned to the kitchen, poured himself one finger of rye, and held it in the dim light. The schoolyard echo faded, but its lesson stayed. Reputation could be tested, but integrity held steady when met with unwavering calm. He emptied the glass in one sip, leaving behind only resolve. He wasn't chasing vengeance, he was setting an example. And tonight, another piece of their foundation stayed firm. Ethan Hayes found the eviction notice on his doorstep, at dawn, Geneva's signature crisp, but hesitant officially terminating her tenancy in the Brooklyn condo. He didn't read further. He pocketed the envelope and slipped into his car, heading into the city for what would be his most calculated move yet. No anger, no drama, just resolve. He arrived at Winter and Levanter LLP before the morning sun touched the skyline. The polished lobby felt colder than usual, as though it too understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Preston Levanter greeted him with a nod, more curt than polite, his expression betraying respect, filtered by caution. Ethan didn't smile. He simply handed over a new folder. Preston opened it, eyes widening at the first page, the signed termination of Geneva's rights to the property she assumed she'd inherit. The next sheet, a clear custody agreement drafted in Ethan's favor, anchored by documented school performance, emotional support letters, and character references. Then bank records showing Geneva's name on Silas Dubrien's frozen accounts. Levanter looked up. "This isn't what we discussed," he said, voice low. Ethan folded his arms. "It's exactly what I approved. Geneva gets her stuff. She gets the Brooklyn condo for a year without profit. After that, ownership reverts, and custody remains primarily with me. She can request extended visitation if she seeks help maintaining stability for the girls." Preston swallowed hard. "You're cutting her off completely." Ethan stared across the table. "She's already cut herself off. She chose to sever. I'm merely setting reality's boundaries." Preston rubbed his forehead. "Your aggressiveness," Ethan interrupted, voice steady, "is precision. You told me discretion. I told you clarity. Discretion doesn't mean weakness." He picked up the documents. "Deliver this to Geneva's counsel by noon. Give her 48 hours to accept or risk forfeiting her rights beyond conditional visitation." Preston paused, then nodded slowly. Ethan placed the folder in Preston's hands like handing over a verdict. He didn't glower. He didn't gloat. He simply walked out. Back in his townhouse, the morning light felt softer now, calmer. Maria handed him a cup of coffee as he entered. "What's next?" she asked quietly. She'd heard the legal gears turning. He took a sip and looked out at the living room where the girls' breakfast dishes were already washed. "She either takes the terms, or we prove that daughters grow under predictable roofs, not shifting sand." Maria nodded. "They'll grow." He nodded back, eyes on the city beyond the window. This was the turning point. The reversal quiet, firm, undeniable. That afternoon in the townhouse living room, he sat with Lena and Mira, reading them a story about two friends who built a house together and faced storms. When the storm passed, one friend refused to rebuild with shaky planks, choosing instead to lay a stronger foundation. Mira looked up. "Is that like us?" He closed the book, placed it on the coffee table. Exactly. Later, he tucked the girls into bed. Lena tucked the blanket around him, a silent hug of trust. He stayed for a moment, then stood, walked back to his study, and lit the lamp. Fetch the documents, he thought, then forward them to Rob. Let the legal world see that love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs. He poured himself his late-night rye, the amber liquid catching the lamp's glow. He drank it in one measured sip. He didn't celebrate. He acted. That was how you protect more than assets. You protect love without breaking the promise of strength. And tonight, the reversal had begun. Dawn found Ethan sipping coffee in his living room, calm, centered, aware. He watched the newsfeed on his tablet, pitched low, but impossible to ignore. Silas Dubrian, indicted for embezzlement and asset fraud, Mike actions traced to backup accounts. The story hit hard. Silas's image, once filled with effortless glamour, flickered across multiple networks as a man unraveling. Ethan didn't react outwardly. He had no victory dance. Instead, he slid the tablet face down. He pressed his fingertips together, eyes closing for a heartbeat. Justice, he knew, wasn't drama. It was consequences meeting truth and truth meeting time. Later that morning, the press conference unfolded. Silas, pale and disheveled, stood behind a podium as reporters lobbed questions. "This is an injustice," he shouted. "I'm being targeted!" But his voice cracked. Desperation echoed in the hum of cameras. Moments later, a live feed caught him, pausing mid-sentence, gripping the podium, pale as a mask as he staggered backward. A soft thud followed. Someone yelled. He'd collapsed untethered, slumped to the stage behind him as aides rushed forward. The news fragment didn't look staged. Ethan didn't watch it. He was with Mira and Lena at Talia's soccer game, the one he never missed. When the announcer whispered, "Number 8 Hayes is goalie," his older daughter leaped in joy. Faces in the stands smiled in recognition. He felt something in that natural world resilience that came without conflict. He looked at his daughters alive and connected, and knew the moment was fuller than any public reckoning. His eyes watered not out of triumph, but understanding. Strength didn't come from other people's falls. It came from steady presence through every rise and collapse. Later, he returned to his study where Maria was organizing files. She nodded, understanding the unspoken moment. "Silas resigned today," she said quietly. "The board voted him out. Everything's collapsed." Ethan nodded and pushed a landline off the desk. He didn't need to call Geneva. The message was visible. He composed an email to the school counselor, and Principal Silas Dubrian is no longer a threat to our children's safety. He hit send. Closure, he believed, begins with letting facts speak. As evening fell, he walked the girls home under streetlights. The city seemed renewed by shadows and light. Mira looked up and asked Daddy, "Do you think he'll be okay?" He thought of Silas once. Confident now, broken in courtroom glare. He said, "He'll find answers. But right now, we focus on ours." Geneva had not appeared. No messages. No calls. Just emptiness, where her story had tried to stand. At their townhouse, he tucked them in. Lena's small voice whispered, "Can we watch the stars tonight?" He lifted a blanket and held the window open for them. Together they watched constellations blink into existence. Neither of them spoke. In that quiet sky, Ethan felt everything he'd lost, and everything he'd protected, the fractures, the loyalty, the power of steady presence. Silas's public collapse meant nothing if what he held inside wasn't firm. Tonight he believed it was. The Brooklyn condo stood empty now. Lights off, mailbox, uncollected silence, replacing the life that once echoed through its walls. Geneva Hayes was gone. Not gone for adventure, not gone for clarity, but gone with nothing but a suitcase and some shredded dignity. Ethan Hayes discovered it through Maria's quiet knock on the townhouse door. She held a small envelope and nothing else. It arrived this morning, slipped under the door, she said, gently, handing it over like it might shatter. He glanced down at the paper, a forwarding address far upstate, somewhere where the maps blurred. No phone number, no explanation. Just one typed line, gone to find peace. Don't look, no signature. He read it twice. No reaction. He folded it and set it on the counter. He'd given her offers safe visitation fair splits, and she had taken none. He'd offered reason. She chose silence. Later that afternoon, he picked up the girls from a piano recital. Mira played first, steady, confident, the notes carrying across the hall. Lena sat with clenched hands, listening until her sister finished, then slapped her palms together in applause. Afterward, as they walked to the car, Mira asked softly, "Daddy, do you think Mom is okay?" He paused, glancing at the sky. "I think she's somewhere she feels safer." "What if she doesn't come back?" Lena's voice was small. He reached for her hand firm. "Then she'll learn what we already know. Home isn't a place. It's the people who stay." Neither girl replied, but their grip tightened. He didn't need more reassurance than that. That night, Maria texted Geneva's account is drained. Utilities shut off. No forwarding forward. That evening, the townhouse hummed with life homework in the kitchen. Mira narrating a book chapter, Lena giggling with her teddy on the couch. No absence felt more real than a heart no longer waiting to be felt. Ethan poured himself a glass of rye and brought it to the balcony. He looked out past Estran Street toward the empty condo. No warm lights beckoned, no voicemail, just darkness. He closed his eyes. The betrayal, the loss, the legal fights, all of it had led to this moment. A woman who walked away when her foundations cracked. But tonight, he held the pieces she'd left behind, and he held them gently. He didn't need her presence to prove their family still existed. At midnight, he put his glass down and swallowed the rest in one drawn breath. No triumph, no pain, just certainty he had protected what mattered. Their foundation was quiet, solid. He went back inside to the girls' rooms. They slept soundly, blankets neat, trust renewed. He stood in the doorway a moment longer, then turned out the light. Home remained, and that was enough. Geneva Hayes sat alone at the small writing desk in her upstate cottage, the low morning light casting a quiet glow across yellowed stationery. She paused, pen hovering, as if the words held too much power. In the silence, she began, "Dear Ethan, I don't expect you'll ever read this. I don't deserve your forgiveness or yours. I'm writing more for myself than for you." She stopped again, pressing the pen tip to the paper. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of truth long ignored. She breathed deeply and continued, "I thought I needed to escape, to find something that didn't exist inside us anymore. I told myself our love was buried, that life with you was silent and safe, but I lied to myself. Safety wasn't living. It was sleeping through warnings. I woke up feeling hollow, and I mistook the void for freedom. Tears blurred her vision as she thought of his silence when she walked out. Not revenge, not rage, but a measured refusal to crumble. She added, "You asked for clarity. I gave silence. You offered strength. I offered chaos. You stood there with dignity and steady hands while I carried firecrackers in my pockets. Now I understand what you protected, not a house, but your daughters. And something else, your honor." She reread the passage, her heart tightening. She hated the way she'd underestimated him for being thoughtful, for waiting, for choosing peace over fury. She crossed out the words that blamed him, replaced them with honesty. "I never understood that peace had its own roar, quiet, steady, unbreakable. I thought I wanted adventure. I wanted to make you jealous, to make myself feel something. I forgot that love is louder when it doesn't have to fight for attention." She folded the letter with care and slid it into an envelope. Above her trembling fingers, she wrote his name. Then she paused. To stay or to send? She thought of her daughters, their drawings of home, the blanket he tucked around them each night. She remembered his gentle promise in the schoolyard. "We're bending, but not breaking." She realized her apology couldn't be built on words. It would require steps she couldn't take now. Quietly, she sealed the envelope without affixing a stamp. The apology was hers alone. Not for him. Not for them. For herself. She rose and walked to the window, watching sunlight on the trees, listening to the distant river's flow. She tucked the letter into the desk drawer before closing it for the last time. Geneva left the cottage soon after. No trace. No forwarding address. She carried the unsent letter in her mind, a reminder that some truths are too late for others to read, but never too late to feel. Ethan Hayes stood in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Arts Gala, dressed in midnight navy and poised before a mic. The room shimmered with crystal chandeliers, hushed conversations, and the weight of silent expectations. He'd been invited to speak tonight not as a broken husband, but as a figure of steady triumph. He cleared his throat and surveyed the crowd, philanthropists, community leaders, colleagues. Face after familiar face, none betrayed suspicion, only respect. "Thank you," he began, voice steady for honoring the Veterans Art Initiative we've built this year. He paused, focusing on the women in the front row, Lena and Mira catching their breath in formal dresses too big for their ankles. They wore their father's pride like armor. His chest tightened with pride and tenderness as he continued, "Tonight, I don't just speak for art. I speak for resilience, for love that doesn't collapse under pressure, but stands firm, one choice at a time." Applause rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. A spotlight glowed on Ethan's daughters, their faces alight with admiration. He stepped back off stage and knelt beside them. Lena whispered, "Daddy, I'm so proud." Mira added, "You're my hero." He hugged them both until applause began again, another round louder this time. He looked out from their embrace and felt the truth his life had shifted from rupture to renewal. Moments later, he stood alone near the bar, sipping sparkling water. A reporter approached diplomatically. "Ethan Hayes, your story's resonating. About forgiveness, integrity, your daughters." He cut her off gently. "My story's not mine alone. It's theirs, too." He gestured to the stage. "Two girls with a father who stayed. That's what matters." She nodded and gave a knowing smile. Across the room, someone murmured, "He didn't just rise, he anchored." He caught press eyes from colleagues, those who'd once murmured. Now they held reverence. On the balcony outside, Ethan found Maria calm in sequins, letting cool air brush past. She offered him a small smile. They made it about family, she said softly. You did him proud. He nodded. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about showing what we don't break from. He glanced at the girls watching the city lights below. They needed to see that without me losing us. Maria placed a hand on his shoulder. They saw it. Back inside, the awards began. Ethan's name echoed. He walked up to accept the award, his daughters trailing behind. He looked out. Geneva's absence was a quiet first row of empty seats, a space he'd learned not to fill. He stepped forward and spoke. This award is for the veterans who turned their struggle into color, for my daughters who taught me meaning isn't always loud, and for every family rebuilding one steady step at a time. The applause engulfed him. Cameras caught his daughters grinning with tears. He smiled at the moment. Not a bravado, but humility crystallized in public triumph. Later, under the exiting lights, he walked the girls to their car. They chattered softly about school art contests, sleepover plans. He smiled at their ease. Tonight was good, right? Lena nodded. Better than good. Mira squeezed his hand. Perfect. He leaned down and kissed their cheeks. Then we call it a win. At home, the night deepened. He tucked them in one last time before stepping into his study. He pulled out the unsent letter he'd found in Geneva's folder weeks ago. He placed it in the drawer, untouched. Some truths are meant to stay where they belong. He poured one final glass of rye, lifted it to the empty air, and whispered, "To the ones who stay, because that's what home is." He closed the drawer, turned off the light, and left the house behind, not broken, not lost, but unshakably at peace. Ethan Hayes stepped barefoot onto the back patio as dawn stretched across the sky. The garden he planted with his daughters had healed faster than any wound inside his chest. He knelt beside the hydrangea blue blossoms, brushing petals with a steady hand. In their flowers, he saw life, not salvage, not regret, just growth. His phone buzzed a text without a name. He opened it. "We need to talk. It's urgent." No signature, no return number. He didn't reply. He understood too well how words without substance could reopen old wounds. He walked inside and found the girls already in breakfast mode. Serial laughter, the morning hum of home. Mira carried a drawing, "Dad's home is where peace lives," with stick figures, standing in a house under a glowing sun. He lifted her and kissed her forehead. "You're right," he said. "All of this starts and ends here together." He set the drawing on the table as Lena offered help pouring milk. The kitchen felt warm in the mid-morning light. No mention of secrets, no talk of absent parents, just the continuation of life. They talked of art class soccer plans the week ahead. He listened. He guided. He responded with presence, not pity. They thrived where stability lived. Later, he stepped into his study. He pulled open the top drawer and removed the unsigned letter, unfolding it carefully. He read it again, the lines of remorse never mailed, but deeply felt. Not for him, not for them, for herself. He pressed the letter between pages of a journal and closed the drawer. Then he reached into the folder beneath the letter and pulled out the custody agreement. His signature lay beneath Geneva's. He stared at it for a long breath before sliding it into a sealed envelope labeled "Closed." Minimalist finality. No anger, no triumph, just clarity. He walked to the front door, stepping outside into the spring air that smelled of fresh growth. The hydrangeas waved gently in the morning breeze. He raised his glass of coffee, scanning the street where neighbors waved across breakfast porches and streetlights blinked off one by one. This block, this life, it was built one quiet morning at a time. Back inside, he washed up and returned to the girls. After helping them on with coats for school, he knelt again at their level. Today, I want you both to remember something. The truth we build in silence is stronger than the noise we run from. They nodded heads full of simple trust. He hugged them, kissed their cheeks, then sent them out the door with waves and support. He watched them walk away, confident, loved, unburdened. When the quiet returned, he stepped into the garden again. He knelt, placed fresh water at each plant's base, and took in its fullness, a garden grown from careful tending, not frantic replanting. He stood and walked back to the house, glass of coffee in hand, ready for the day. There were no apologies to give, no battles left unresolved. Just a home rooted in resilience, a father who stayed, who held steady when things broke. That was his victory, his peace, and his story. Sometimes the deepest triumphs are not loud. They aren't headline-worthy or wrapped in applause. They come quietly, in the still of morning, in the silence after truth is spoken, in the calm following a storm long weathered. Healing doesn't always mean forgetting. It means knowing deeply what broke us, and choosing to live anyway, stronger for it. This wasn't just a story of betrayal or justice. It was a story of what happens when someone refuses to become what others tried to reduce them to. When pain is no longer something to hide, but something to rise from. When walking away isn't weakness, but wisdom. There's a quiet kind of power in refusing to play a rigged game, in planting something new instead of salvaging what rotted. The world doesn't hand out closure. Sometimes you create your own. Not out of revenge, not to prove anything, but because peace, dignity, and truth are worth more than control, manipulation, or false love. If there's anything to carry forward, it's this. You don't need the approval of those who discarded you to live a life of purpose, joy, and strength. You just need the courage to begin again on your terms. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, challenged you, or simply made you think, drop a comment. Share your reflections and connect with others in this community. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. Until next time, stay grounded, stay brave, and never forget what you're worth.